And it's my understanding that Hood's guys are especially angry.
They are
in this
very, very
engagement.
angry. Yes,
Why is that?
because they have not eaten, according to Hood, in 3 days. Now they've been eating. They've been eating, green corn and green apples, but that's not eating.
Yeah.
And so he's going to remember they were in front of the cornfield. They were engaged in front of the east woods with the 13th Pennsylvania Reserves. And so Hood is going to ask permission of Stonewall Jackson. Can I pull my men back into the West Woods? Will you replace them? And I can then feed them and have them ready for the battle the next day. And Stonewall Jackson says, yeah, I can do that. I'll replace them. So he's going to bring Douglas up. He's going to bring Walker up. He says, but I'll do it only on one condition. If I need you in the morning, you come immediately. Bottom line, they all agree. Pulls them back into the West Woods, and they're in the morning. Hood can't find the wagons with all the provisions. And those wagons won't come up until almost daylight. And they're not ready. They've not been prepared. There's flour and yeast. There's not biscuits and flapjacks. And there's not bacon. They got to cut everything up and cook it.
Yeah.
And they're at 7 o'clock in the morning now. The fighting began at 6, approximately. And they can smell it. They can see it. And they're starving, basically.
And they've been fighting already.
They were fighting the night before, and they've been fighting very hard fighting at Fox's Gap as well on the 14th. At the least, you want to be able to feed them.
Army marches on its stomach.
Indeed. They're not this one, though. And so what happens then is that Courier comes galloping into the West Woods, finds Hood, and he says, Hood, excuse me, to Hood, General Jackson's compliments. He needs you immediately. And Hood will say to his men, stop what you're doing, pick up your rifles, get in line. They have not eaten a mouthful yet.
And they got to smell it. Oh.
And they are furious.
I'd be mad too.
So here you have Hood's men coming out. They're coming from the West Woods along Smoketown Road. And as they're marching up Smoketown Road, here come the Yankees, specifically the Iron Brigade that's driven through the cornfield. It sees its objective, which is the Dunker Church. And all of a sudden, I can't even imagine the horror as they see the objective. They're getting closer and closer, and all of a sudden, a line of rebels, about 2,200 of them. And worse, these guys will turn to their left and fire. And it's like a scythe running through our line, as one of the officers said from the 6th Wisconsin. Save who can. And they will backtrack immediately back to the cornfield. And Hood's men are right on their tails.
Now, that's Rufus Dawes that says that.
That's correct.
Right? So I take it as everybody is running for their lives at this point.
Oh, yeah. And they're going through the cornfield. And there's another memoir. His name is Lieutenant James Lemon, who is with the 18th Georgia. And that was interesting. They're with the Texas Brigade. And the Texans are going to call them the 3rd Texas.
Even though they're from Georgia?
That's right. Because, so they had the 1st. They had the 4th and the 5th, and they made them the 3rd because they were such good fighters. And he talks about how that a group of men from the Iron Brigade are going to stop about 100 yards into the cornfield, and Hood's men will come in after them, will stop, will raise their rifles and fire. When the smoke clears, there's nobody left. They're all gone.
Wow.
Yeah, and the rest of the Iron Brigade, Phelps's Brigade, you're going to have Ricketts' Brigade on the left of Doubleday, who are also vacating the cornfield. In other words, the entire cornfield is being vacated by Union troops. And here come Hood's men into the cornfield. And there's nothing stopping them.
That would be crazy to see. You have all this momentum going one direction, and then like a light switch, it just right back the other way.
Yes. I mean, talk about a startling turn of events. I mean, there couldn't be anything more startling than that.
No, and just to elaborate on how good because I feel like when dealing with the Civil War, a lot of people will say, "Well, this unit is great fighters," or this and that. But just to elaborate on how good the Texans were, Robert E. Lee will say later in the war, I believe it's at Spotsylvania when he's trying to get them to either charge or hold the mule shoe. Is that's at
Could be, or it could have been the wilderness.
But he says something to the effect of Texans always move them.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
I'll tell you right now, as an infantry guy, having your general in chief
Yes.
say that about your unit, that's a special thing.
Oh,
They're
yeah,
not just going to
yeah.
throw that comment out willy nilly.
Right.
I know it's the heat of the battle. He's trying to get them motivated, but he had to think of that. And and I
that was
think
easy.
I think he really did believe
Oh,
that.
there's no question about it. And I think that was a wilderness. Lee is going to actually lead a counterattack. He is so desperate. And here come the Texans. And, he's so relieved that he's going to utter those comments. And they're all begging him, all the foot soldiers, General Lee, don't do this. We will take care of this. And they do. They're going to drive the Yanks back. So, but getting back to Hood's men, they've got a clear sailing through the end of the north end of the cornfield. They can see the fence, etc. And then something happens that really changes the dynamics. One is Hooker is going to designate 2 brigades of George Meade's division as the reserve, and they're going to be camped out around the North Woods. When Hood's men are coming into the cornfield, imagine, if you will, and again, horror, a line of Yanks, a solid line of Yanks that's marching perpendicular to them along that northern fence that will lie down, plop their rifle butts on the bottom rung of the fence and open fire. We've talked about Hood and we talked about the Texas Brigade, but Evander Law's brigade was on the right, and they're advancing so fast that they're literally going to be pushing some of those Pennsylvania reserves from the fence. And I think we all know the worst time to be attacked is when a unit is coming into position, and that's exactly when they caught them. And so they're going to drive, I believe it was the 3rd Pennsylvania, another part of another regiment, back. And these Alabama boys are ready to jump over the fence, and they see these artillery, Union artillery. They said, wow, they're ours for the picking, because there's no Yankee infantry. And these rebels, suddenly, to their horror, are eating canister. Some of the battery, at least one Union battery had withdrawn. Another one decided to stay, and they're firing canister at these guys. And even though there's no infantry and Union infantry, they're going to stop the Confederate advance.
Well, that instance you're talking about is one of my favorite mini stories when
Mm-hmm.
it comes to the battlefield, and it has to do with General John Gibbon, who, from my understanding, wrote the book on artillery, on artillery strategy and
Yes,
employment
he
that
did.
they used at West Point.
Right.
And he'll be with Captain Campbell up on the Hagerstown Pike,
That's correct.
and they're going to be firing, from what I understand, double canister.
Yeah, so that's on the other side, because
Right.
what's happening is now Hood's division is going to be hit on 2 sides. From the north, you're going to have Meade's men, and then from the west, you're going to have a line of men from half a Doubleday's division, essentially crossed Hagerstown Pike. They're the ones who defeated J.R. Jones and the Stonewall Division. They see Hood's men coming into the cornfield. They will come out of the woods. They will line up along Hagerstown Pike, and they're going to open fire. And as you said, Colby, the James Campbell's battery, now part of it had already been there, but the rest of it's going to come up, and they will fire directly into the flank of Hood's men. Well, Hood's men are not going to stand there and get slaughtered. They're going to turn to the fence, and they're going to be fighting against half of Doubleday's division, and now they're up against Campbell's battery. And they are firing double canister rounds. One gun apparently is actually in the road itself, and General Gibbon, who commands a full brigade, we're talking probably close to 2,000 guys, will get off his horse because he sees that cannon overshooting the enemy lines. He's once an artilleryman, always an artilleryman, and so he's going to adjust the elevation. He's going to pull the lanyard, and he's going to actually become an artilleryman. Not even an artillery officer, but an artilleryman, enlisted man pulling lanyards.
Yeah.
And so, but one of the quotes from a Texan is really dramatic. And he talks about when those double canister comes flying out of those barrels. Remember, it's like a shotgun blast.
Yeah.
What happens then is he says arms and legs and bodies and fence rails are flying up in the air like straw in a whirlwind. I mean, you can visualize that.
It's unbelievable.
I picture it. I just picture being a little further east, and this is how I visualize this happening. I almost picture being in like Law's Brigade and looking to my left and seeing this cannon firing double canister off the Hagerstown Pike.
Right.
It's jumping in the air because the rounds are so strong. The cannon's bouncing up into the air when it shoots. And then watch, I mean, it's almost point blank range that this is happening.
Right.
And watching just pink mist cloud of, I mean, evaporate. It just evaporate humans.
Hard to imagine.
It's and the
Hard to
sound
imagine.
that impact would make when it does strike flesh.
Right.
All those balls that come out of the rounds of a canister round. It would be, I mean, that would just be unbelievable to see.
And it's also beyond brave to be in an L-shaped ambush like that and have what you just described, or what both of you just described in that area, and then have the ability to turn and face the enemy, front towards enemy.
Yes.
And are now fighting that. So it's like incredible to not have been routed immediately, or somebody saw that and said, "Let's get out of this situation." They turned towards the enemy.
It's
Yeah,
also
that's true.
brave that think about being the guys manning the cannons. They're not going to want to leave behind their guns. That's the one thing about a crew serve weapons guy, right? You never leave behind your crew serve weapon.
That's right.
But if you're that close to the infantry and you can't keep them off you, you're getting ready to lose those guns. And I mean, not to mention how many guys are going to get killed in the
thing.
pursuit.
So many of them were already out of action. And you've got this young guy, 15 years old, Johnny Cook, who is the bugler, who's going to actually help man the guns. And he's going to get the Medal of Honor, and not for 30 years later, but he will get the Medal of Honor because of his actions trying to keep those guns in action, even though the enemy infantry is firing, killing all of the cannoneers.
When I was 15 years old, I was playing video games.
Yes.
I think about that. That's just unbelievable.
An amazing guy.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. And so you've got three of Hood's. Actually, they were in William Wilford's brigade. They call it the Texas Brigade. That's going to turn and face the enemy. Campbell's guns, half of Doubleday's division. But you're going to have another regiment that slips the bit, as Hood will say, and goes all the way almost to the fence. That's the 1st Texas. And the 1st Texas, and you can see where they stopped because there are these big trees. There's 2 big trees toward the end of the field. You can see it from the southern portion of the cornfield. And you have about 280 some men who are going to go forward to that position. We're talking less than 100 yards they're going to pull up. These guys are up against Anderson's brigade of Pennsylvania Reserves, Meade's men. Over 1,000 guys are going to be facing them, lying down behind a fence rail, rifles propped up. These guys, no protection. And in probably 15 minutes, they will, if that, they're going to lose over 82% of their men.
Good Lord.
It's just
Killer.
hard to imagine.
I think often about if the U.S. was in a war today where we had 82% casualties at any level, right? So you talking squad all the way up to company, brigade, whatever, you name the level, and we had 82% casualties. I feel like the war would be over.
That's
I don't
right.
feel like the U.S. public would have the tolerance to put up with that kind of a loss.
Right.
And it's happening all over the place in this battle. 82%. That boggles the mind. I think about how many guys we deployed with, and we had quite a few casualties on our second deployment. We, total casualties is over 200, and we had quite a few KIA, and that's nowhere close
Right.
to 82%. I mean, that's nowhere close to even 40% or 30%. You know, it's
Right.
that's a different ball game of destruction.
But
there.
that wasn't unusual. I mean, you had units 70%, some in the 60s. The Irish Brigade, one of its regiments at the Sunken Road, lost about 63% of their men. So, I mean, it was not uncommon to have these horrendous losses at that particular battle.
It does baffle me, though, thinking back to that time to now, or, since from then till now, that we didn't have, more situations like that. Because the advancements in weaponry, like they didn't have planes, they didn't have machine guns, they didn't have flamethrowers, tank, whatever, mortars. I mean, they had cannons and rifles. It kind of baffles me almost in a way to imagine it.
Right. But the typical unit is probably going to lose a third to a little bit less, which, I mean, is still
It's
big.
a lot.
It's still a lot, yeah. But it's not like 80% or 60%, but it's still a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
That is a lot. So at this point, I would assume after the first Texas has lost the 82%, you've got John Gibbon and Captain Campbell firing batteries into the flank of Hood's division, and then you also have the other artillery batteries firing canister into their front. I would imagine that counterattack starts to recede.
It's going to have to. No unit can sustain the losses that Hood's men sustained, and they will start pulling back. The funny thing, it's not so funny. It's horrible. But if you watch the movie Gettysburg, I don't want to digress, but one of the seminal scenes is at the end of Pickett's charge. You have this interaction between Lee and Pickett. Do you remember? Where Lee says to Pickett, General Pickett, where is your fine division? And Pickett will say, through gritted teeth, almost in tears, lying on the field where dead, where you sent them.
Yeah.
There's no indication that happened at Gettysburg.
He does say later, correct, that old man killed my...
Well, he did, yes. And very, very bitter. But it happened at Antietam. We know emphatically the evening of the battle, okay, on the evening of the 17th, when he's going around the room, this is Lee, figuring out just how horrendous the losses were. He's going to say essentially that same thing to Hood. And Hood is very, very bitter, lying on the field, dead where you sent it. Hood was, unlike Pickett was upset because that charge he felt should never have happened. Hood never questioned that.
Right.
He questioned lack of reinforcements. Where were the reinforcements you were supposed to be sending me? You sacrificed my division without having adequate support.